Okay, good morning. So we're doing today Yudam and Bays. Well, we are up to about halfway down on Yudam and Aleph, the two dots. It says Tanar Rabbanan, Chamisha Nivru Me'ein Dugma Shal Maila. Number five, that were created Me'ein Dugma Shal Maila. It means they had some sort of incredible talents that were very, very rare, not typical to find. V'chula lagu b'hein. And each one of them with these wonderful, wondrous talents that were so out of the norm, nevertheless got sort of punished with those very things, got sort of struck and hurt with those very talents. Rashi says, "Me'in dugma shel maila is nishtanu menach tachteinu l'teferes." They had something that was very different than the norm, which you would have thought was to their benefit, but in the end, that came to bite them. Shimshon b'koychei shol b'tzavarai, Avshalom b'sayre tzidke be'enav asa b'raglav. What are these things? Shimshon with his unbelievable strength, Shol with his unbelievable neck. What this is referring to, says the Marsha, is most likely Meshifma v'malag avayim kol. He was head, shoulders, not the dandruff, but the physical stature, taller than everybody else. Avshalom Messiah, as we already mentioned, Avshalom had the long hair, again, longer than everyone else. Tzidkiya be'enav, Marsha, Rashi, nobody really knows what this means. Rashi says, if you look at Tzidkiya be'enav, Rashi says, Lo yadana. Minon d'nishtana l'shav. Rashi says, I don't really know what this refers to. Like, how did he have some superhuman eyesight? The Marsha points out maybe this is referring to what it says at the end of Malachim. Rashi over there brings down a chazal that Tzidkiya was running through a tunnel and a deer chased, and if they wanted to catch the deer, they found Tzidkiya, they blinded him, and maybe he was trying, and he was able to move at night because he had some wondrous eyes. It's not clear in the Pesukim exactly what it is. But whatever it was, he eventually gets blinded. Asa Baraglav, Asa, again, Rashi says he's not really sure. V'chein Asa Baraglav. Rashi's like, I don't know what's so special about his feet. And in the end, he gets hurt by his feet. Kach Shama Rabbi, but you know, obviously he heard from his rabbi that Asa had special feet, and then he got hurt with his feet. Shimshon Mekaychev, so the Gemara explains, Shimshon with his strength, that was way out of the norm, way out of the regular. Nevertheless, gets punished. Right? He loses his strength in the end of his life, again because of the fact that he had given over the secret of his hair, etc. Shol b'tzavari, Shol with his neck. Right? In the end, Shol's great stature, his great height, is brought down. Again, I'm not sure exactly 100% how this has to do with the neck. What it is clear from the Sukkim is that Shaul was very afraid at the end of his life of, as he's losing the war against the Pelishtim, he was very concerned for the fact that he might be killed by them. And what they would do with a dead king of Israel is essentially not just mutilate him, which they do, but that they would parade him around and really humiliate him, which would be a very terrible thing for the Jewish people, not just for himself. And so therefore he commits suicide. Right? He actually killed himself. He had asked his sort of sword bearer, etc., to do it, and nobody was willing to do it. Itself, the question, right? As I mentioned already before, we don't really have time to discuss Shimshon's suicide, Shaul's suicide. Shimshon's was very different, right? Because in his suicide, he essentially took down thousands of Pelishtim, more than he ever killed in his whole life. Whereas Shaul's suicide is just killing himself, to spare himself the indignity and the humiliation, the pain, and perhaps to spare the Jewish people, but it wasn't adding any additional benefits other than that. Whereas by Shimshon, his suicide is actually to go out and save thousands of Jewish people. So again, that is all discussed, and for another time we'll try to get it in. Now, continues the Gemara. So Avshalom, what's the story of Avshalom's? He had an incredible hair. So Avshalom Basari, come on, Avshalom and his hair, we're going to talk about more. Tzidkiyo be'einav, what about Tzidkiyo and his eyes? Again, as I said, Rashi doesn't exactly know. Marsha gave a suggestion. Es eine Tzidkiyo iver. Later on, we know that Tzidkiyo at the end, he gets blinded. So clearly he had some special eyes, and then he got hurt with that. Asa Braglam, again, we don't know exactly what was so special about his feet, but in the end, he gets hurt in the area of his feet. At the end of his life, as he got old, he had a pain in his feet. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav She'achazase Padgeron, that he had some sort of a gout. I don't know exactly. He had some problem with his feet. Um, this is a bigger topic in terms of asa and his feet. It relates a lot to the Ramban and the Parsha about going to doctors. The Machlokes with the Rambam. I don't have time to get into it now, but Ayin Sham. It's a very interesting. Amar Lei Mar Zutra Braid Rav Nachman. Heichi Dami Padgira. So the Gemara wants to know what exactly is this disease of Padgira? How does it work? So Amar Lei Kemacha Bevasar Achai said it's like a needle going through the flesh of somebody. Mino Yoda, how do you know? So one answer is that Rav Nachman also had it. In other words, Marzucha Breder Rav Nachman is asking Rav Nachman, hey, how does this padgira work? So he says, oh, it's like a needle going through the flesh. That's how much it hurts. So how did Rav Nachman know that? So one answer is Mechashav Echashbe. He also had the gout. V'yigadami Rabbi Shamalei. He heard it from his rabbi. V'yigadami, he said Hashem Lireav. No, he got a special sort of secret knowledge that he got from the Rebbeinu Shalom that Hashem gives over to those that are close to him. Of course, this is what to remind you of what we had already in Dalan Beis. Right, the Giveg already points out the Gilin Hashas, and if you go back to Dalan Beis, you'll see over there the Gemara asked a question about Ben Azai, at the top of the page there. How did Ben Azai know what the amount of time is for Kedei Piyah, or Kedei Hara, depending on which understanding of Rashi you have? So the Gemara says, "Yibayisema nasivu perish," and one is that he knew because he was once married and he separated from his wife. He got divorced because of nafshikash batera. Yibayisema merabe shemilei. Another answer is that he heard from his rabbi. Yibayisema said Hashem lireav. Another answer is that he also had a special secret knowledge because of the fact that he was very special. So it's a very similar kind of lesson. The only two places in Shas that we find it both right here. One about amount of time, the intimacy, and one about some sort of a foot ailment. Yeah. So now we get into a very interesting sugi here. We'll spend a little time on it because it's delicious and because it's timely in the current politics. Says the Gemara Darish Rava. So Rava said, why was Asa punished that he had such a foot ailment? Because he made the rabbis be an Angaria. He normally understood, I mean that he made the rabbis go to war. He made them go fight. Because the pasuk says that he brought the entirety of Yehuda. Remember, Asa is the king of Yehuda. At that time, the kingdoms are split, and he brought somebody to, and he sent out a message to all of Yehuda to come and help him. Ein Naki, what does the pasuk mean over there? That it says that he made all of Yehuda come. Ein Naki, nobody was spared from this. My Ein Naki, I'm Rav Yehuda, I'm Rav. Afilu chasa mechadrei v'chala mechupasa. Even a chasa and kala had to come from wherever they were to go and go help him out and go and going to go fight or going to go help him out was the problem that causes him to get this foot ailment. Now, let's start here at the beginning of understanding this Gemara about being ice on gar with Tam Chacham. If you have not everybody has, but if you have an Adarim, go back to the Adarim Lamed Beis. If not, I'll read it to you. Right? The Gemara over there says the following. Amar Abava Amar Blazer. Ibnei Nan is the bottom of the Gemara. Why is it that the Jewish people got a shibud in Mitzrayim for 210 years? Because Avram Avinu did an Angaria with the Talmid Chachamim. What do you mean he did an Angaria with the Talmid Chachamim? He brought the Talmid Chacham to war. Right, because the pasuk says that when he went to go fight, to go rescue Light, by Yarkas Chanichav, right? He took the people who were his acolytes and he brought them to the war. So that is one of the reasons given in the Gemara. The Gemara gives another reason. Shmuel says because he said about Ma'edam, and Rabbi Yechon says because he He gave back the people that really she should have kept. He gave back the people of Sodom back to Melech Sodom, and he didn't keep them. What is an Angar of Talmidei Chachamim? Look at the Ran here on Lamed Beis. The Ran tells us She'asa Angar b'Talmidei Chachamim She'halichon L'Milchama. He brought the students, the Talmidei Chachamim, he brought them to war, as we pointed out before. Talmidei Chacham are not Chachamim. Right? And today we call Talmidei Chacham Chachamim. What they initially were is essentially the students of Torah. He brought them to war, and that was not appropriate. These were people who were students of Torah who should not have been brought to the war he's going to fight against the Malchus. Clear? That's the Gemara here in the Dharm. Now, we know, and everybody knows, everybody quotes this, that the Rambam, the end of Shemitah V'Yovel, the Rambam says, "V'lo Shevet Levi Bilvad." It's not just the Shevet Levi that's potter from going to war, but even the people who dedicate their lives to understanding Torah, meaning the Talmid Chachamim, as I pointed out before, it's not really such a clear point at all, because the Rambam uses a lashon of mikol bay ha'olam. Anybody mikol bay ha'olam. As I proved that's why it's not a proof to the idea that the Rambam is talking about Talmidei Chachamim, because the Rambam used mikol bay ha'olam only 2 times. Where's the other time they used mikol bay ha'olam? Rosh Hashanah, right? The Rambam tells the Nechas Tshuva, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Rosh Hashanah judges the whole world mikol bay ha'olam. So if the Rambam is saying in the end of Shemitah V'Yovel that it's not just Shev Levi Bavad, but anybody we call Baya Olam, and it's a word he only uses 2 times in the whole of Mishnah Torah. One time he clearly refers to the whole of the world. So then really what he's saying is, well, anybody dedicates their life to God, not just Jews, anyone who's dedicating their life to a spiritual path is what he's referring to. More than that, as I pointed out before, the end of the Rambam, whenever he does, at the end of a Sefer, in this case, the end of Zeraim, he uses hortatory language, Mushalik language. It's not a language of halacha, and so one is not supposed to be learning out from this. And then, of course, the third answer to say, well, he's not just giving a blanket exemption to anybody who wants to learn, is look at the Radbaz over there. You'll see that the Radbaz is very clear that what he's talking about is people who have the ability ready to sort of support themselves, as whatever he said, not that they are going with the public side. So any one of those 3 ways, that already explains the Rambam. But I want to today use it in the classic way that it's understood as a proof that the Rambam holds that people who are learning do not have to do anything that the public would otherwise have to do. Again, why would you be going to the Rambam Shemitah if you're able to prove it? Why wouldn't you be proving it from the Rambam Hilchos Talmud Torah? Shouldn't that be a place where he would say this? No. But for today, we're giving the other side of this equation the final word. So we're saying the Rambam Hilchos Shemitah V'Yovel is telling us that not just Shevet Levi is exempt from anything that the public has to do, but anybody who is a Talmud Chacham is exempt from whatever the public is otherwise required to do. Look at the Gemara Bash Ches. Over there says that you are not able to take out the Talmid Chacham to go be chain gangs. All right, look in a couple of places in Shas you find the idea that, including in Sotah, as we will see later on, that when it comes to learning, that the Torah is magna umatz. The Torah protects. The Torah protects you. And over here, you'll see this. We'll get to this later on Chaf Aleph Amid Aleph. So for our purposes today, I just wanted to mention to you 2 shuvas. One is the shuvah of Chassam Sofer Chelik Vav. Shuvah Chaf Tes. Chassam Sofer deals with the situation about what happened in his days in Slovakia, where under the Austro-Hungarian Empire, they are demanding people go to war, and they demand that from each community to provide people to go to war. And the way it would often work is the rich would get the poor to go for them by essentially giving their families money. And you have to produce 100 soldiers, so that's how they got the 100 soldiers. But the rich never went. What about the Tamil Chachamim? Says the Chassam Sofer. He says, look, I don't really want to talk about this too much in the public. It's really not appropriate to be discussing this. It's Din of the Malchusa. We have to abide by it. Yada yada yada. But he says, nevertheless, ach bachurim loim de teresh. I feel loy patcher b'malchus beferish mikol makom midin Torah peturim. Even if the kingdom is not giving them the petur, midin Torah they are pater. You know the Gemara Bashaches, 100% that they should be pater. And he says many times he's helped these students not to have to go to the war. That is very clear. That according to some sefer, he thinks that whatever the mandates are, if you bring in this certain amounts of people, the students should be spared from it. The Marit in Chelik Beis, Marit in Choshen Mishpah, the Marit says something similar. The Marit writes in Chelik Beis Simanun Tet. Marit writes, well, what does it mean exactly what a Talmid Chacham is? Not every single place is the same understanding what a Talmid Chacham is. When it comes to being pater from various taxes, including monetary, but also in this case, as it relates to going to war, it doesn't just mean somebody who's a paisik. It doesn't just mean somebody who's a rav. It's not just that. But not just the leaders of the community. Anybody, even a young student, but he's working hard and he's learning. And he has the abilities, you see, he has talent. Also, it's also take from any taxes. Also to take from any taxes. Not just from the Gdeli Olam, not just from the Rabbanan, not just from the Marei, not just from the leaders of the community, even a young student. If you see he has talent, he's working hard, he is not to be paid for any taxes, obviously not to be sent to any wars. Very clear. And therefore, right, we're done here. No, nothing left to see. Pasha, yes? Not so Pasha. So let's finish up on this topic. And in order to do so, we have to turn to the end of Sotah. Also happens to be, we used to try to get in a little bit of Vartar every weekend. Forgot this from time to time, but sometimes it slaps you right in the face, right? So we have this Gemara. We have our parsha that we're laying this Shabbos, Parsha Shoftim. When it happens at the end of Parsha Shoftim, the Torah tells us about who doesn't go to war. Mia Ish. We're going to learn about somebody who's marrying a woman. Mia Ish, not the Karen, but like Hillah. Mia Ish, Hasheras Isha, V'lo L'Kacha, right? Mia Ish, Shabbat Abayis. All these people, they don't have to go to war. So if you look and in the Gemara Mem Daled Beis, the Mishnah there, you look there in the last Mishnah there in the parak. But also if you look on Mem Gimel Amud Aleph in the Mishnah there, you'll see that is literally from our parsha, Mia Ish, who did these various things. They don't have to go to war. That's what the Mishnah says in Mem Gimel. Quote literally our psukim from the parsha, and then look here on Mem Daled Beis, the end of the Mishnah there, right before the Gemara, and the end of the parak. What does it say? Everyone has to go to war. Even a chas and kala have to go from the bridal canopy, have to go to fight the war. By the way, before we move any further, as we'll see later on, what happens if they go back from the war and they don't actually go fight? What do they do then? They go home and just be a nice married couple? No. The Gemara tells us that they have to go and be helping the war effort, even if they don't have to go fight in a situation where some Chamas are trust, they don't have to go fight, they don't have to leave. They nevertheless still have to help the war effort. Maybe they make food for the army, they help bring water, whatever it might be, but they do something. But by Mechemes mitzvah, they have to go fight. Everyone has to go fight. Now let's go back to our Gemara here. So let's look at the more here on Yudam and Aleph for a second. The Gemara tells us, so what's the reason that Asa gets punished? Because he made an angar between Acham. He made the rabbis go fight. That's what the Ran said. He made the rabbis go fight in a war, which we said that's Asr. That's not what he's supposed to do. They're punished from the Ram Shvita V'Yevel, the Shuvah Sapsefer, the Shuvah Bared, etc. Correct? Okay. And then the Gemara continued and said, Einok, no one was free from this job to go that he was calling everybody. He went out and one even made a chassan and cows go along. So what's wrong with this? Is it a mechamas mitzvah here or not? So let's first understand what a mechamas mitzvah is. The Rambam in Hilchos Malachim, Parak Hey, Halacha Aleph. The Rambam tells us that there's three mechamas mitzvahs. One is Shiva Amen. Two is mechamas Amalek. And three is, says the Rambam, the Ezras Yisrael Mitzar Shabo Aleim. When you have an enemy who's attacking the Jewish people and you're saving them, that is also a situation of Mechames Mitzvah. Says the Rambam, in case you're wondering if you paskin like our Mishnah, we just saw Mem Daled, the Rambam writes in Hilchos Malachim, Parak Zayin Halacha Daled, when do we send people back home from the war? Everyone goes. Everyone goes. No exceptions. Everyone goes. Including everyone. Means everyone. So, what's the answer then over here in this Gemara? There are two ways to deal with it. One is the way the Marsha does. Says the Marsha over here, what are we talking about? What's the Muhammad that we were talking about? Says we're not talking about Muhammad mitzvah. We're talking about Muhammad Rishos. So if it's the Muhammad Rishos, then the Muhammad don't go fight. Right? Then even the Chazakal should not be leaving. They should be enjoying their first year marriage. Not Gila Beis, Shana Echaz, this week's Parsha. We see Machatzlish to Ashalokach. Says the Marsha, that's the reason he was punished, because we're not talking about a Mechames mitzvah here. We're talking about a Mechames Rishos. Now, from the Parsha Psham, you wouldn't even know that, but that's how the Marsha learned. However, I believe over here it's very interesting, because in the Dharm we quoted you a Ran. But the Ran says, what does it mean? It means that going to fight the war. Look at Rashi. What does Rashi say over here in the Argamar? See Rashi? Rashi says that Asa, what he did wrong was he made an angar b'tamen hachamim. Says Rashi, avodas hamelach. He put them to work for the king, which is literally the pashup shah and the psukim there. The pashup shah and the psukim there has nothing to do with war. He put them to work for the king. He made a massive draft to bring in people for his own benefit, to work in the palace. What did the Mishpat HaMelech that we learned at the beginning of Shmuel, when Shmuel was warning the Jewish people, don't get a king, don't get a king, also happens to be this week's Parsha, when the Jewish people are going to ask for a king, right? And all the warnings about what a king shouldn't do, he shouldn't be Marba, Susim, and Nashim, and Ketlev, etc. So Shmuel there, in the beginning of Shmuel, gives a big zittling out to the Jewish people, says, don't ask for a king, you don't know what's going to mean. Because the king can do terrible things. One of the things he says is he's going to take all of your girls for rakachas and tabachas in the kitchen. And he's going to take all your boys to make him runners in his entourage. That's part of the Mishpat HaMelech. He can do that. Now, we understand, according to the Rashi's learning, which is the Pashup Shah and the Psukim there, Malachim. What did Asa do? He was doing a Mishpat HaMelech. He wanted to have a big entourage. He wanted to have a bigger palace. He wanted to have, the roads. Now, so he went and made a tax. He brought everybody in. Says the Gemara, including the Chazan Kala, including the Talmidei Chachamim. There's not much kind of mitzvah here. It's Avodas HaMelech. Of course, it makes sense why he's being punished. So no proof at all from this Gemara, even though the word Angaria is used, and even though it's exactly the same lashon as the Gemara in Dharm Lamed Beis, the Ran over there says it's about war, where it's obviously pushing. But Yark as Chanicha Viludi Beis said, what happens if everyone wants to go fight? And he chased them. A year they fight done, he's chasing them to go fight. So there's no doubt what he's doing. But here, it's not. So it could very well be that they want to discuss the sugya there in the Dharm. Don't use Sotah as one of the proofs to the sugya. Or use the Marsha, which says it's a Mechames Rishus, because Asa was not essentially being attacked by others. All right, we have to move on. Says the Gemara. The pasuk says that Shimshon went down to Timnah when he was going to, with these Pelishti women. The pasuk tells us by Tamar that they informed her that her father-in-law is going to up to Timnah. So do you go down to Timnah or do you go up to Timnah? Says the Gemara, Reb Lezer, Shimshon shenis gana ba ksiv be Yerida, Yehuda shenis alaba ksiv be Aliyah. Shimshon, who had a Ganai associated with his going down to Timnah to go having the affairs with the Pelishti woman, that's why it's a Yerida. But Yehuda, who's going to essentially go make the sparks of Mashiach, so by him it's an Aliyah, right? He's going up to Timnah. Now, there was two different places of Timnah. It's very not uncommon in Tanakh. If you go through, you'll see there's tons of places that have the same names, and it's very confusing many times. Right? There's the Beis Lachem of Yehuda. Right? That's one place, but then there's also Beis Lachem in the Binyamin. There's Rama here, there's Rama there. Like there's many times you get very confused. Where are we talking exactly? So simple answer: there's two Timnas. One you go down to, one you go up to. There was really only one timna. If you went from one direction, meaning as Rashi explains, it's shipur on a mountain, right? It was like on we live in the crest of Crest Hill, so this is not a good example. But if somebody lives on the bottom of Crest Hill, right? So if you're coming from the top of Crest Hill, so you're making your Yerida to go down. If you're coming up from what's the street, Passaic Avenue, you're coming up the block, so you're making Aliyah, right? Depends where you're coming from. That's the difference in the direction. And the Mar gives a couple of examples: Kegoin, Vardunyo, Beiberi, Shukat, Denarish. Right? Those are examples also of places that sort of sat in the middle of a mountain or a hill, and depending on which direction you're coming from, you're either going up or down to, and that's how it explains why Timnah was both going up and down. But she was sitting there at the entrance, right, of simple pshat is she was sitting there at the crossroads, and maybe that was the place where the Zayna sat. The Ramban there says that in Spain that's sort of the practice, right? You wait by the places where it's going to be busiest. If you want business, that's the most obvious way to do it, right? If you want to get a day's work and you're an illegal sort of migrant, you're going to wait by Home Depot. You're not going to wait, by the medical office. That's not where you're going to find a job, right? And that's where the ICE is going to wait too, because they know. You follow where it is. This is where the action is. That's the part of Pshat. What it means? She stabbed in Pesach Einayim. Amar Alexandra Milamed Sheholcha B'Yoshua B'Piskei Shel Avram Avinu. He wants to take it not from the Pshat, but from a more Drash understanding that she went to go sit with him in Pesach Einayim. The doorway of Avram Avinu, that Makim Shekol Einayim Tzayfeis L'Roisei, right? A place that all the eyes were straining to go to see. That's where she was sitting. Again, I'm not exactly sure if he was trying to intimate that was a specific place where Avram's tent was, or something else. Rav Chanin Amar Rav Mokim Shmoy Einayim. The simple way he wants to read it is Pesach Einayim, that there was actually a place called Einayim, and she sat by the entrance to that place. So there is a place like that. Rav Shimon Achmani Amar Shenitna Einayim L'Dvarel. Right? What does it mean that she was sitting with Pesach Einayim? That she gave sort of eyes to her words, meaning that she gave a certain strength, right, to what she was about to do. Rashi says she gave herself a heter, nitna la'atzma she'ein aver b'davar. Right, the Rambam points out there in Chumash it could be that there was a mitzvah of yibum as it applied to a father-in-law, not just to a brother. In those days, pre-Sinai, right, there was a concept clearly of even pre-Sinai. And the Ramban says it could be that in those days that was how it was done. That wasn't just a brother; it was any family member that she would get married to would be a sufficient way of doing yibum. Either way, these are different ways of understanding, what it means to Pesach Einayim. Again, the simple shot is sort of the confluence or the crossroads of that area. Kisha Tava Amar Law, right? When he was propositioning her, he said to her. Again, this is nothing to do with the pshat, right? The simple pshat, if you look in Parashat Vayeshev, is that there was a monetary discussion, right? There was a payment of shnei gedim, right? 2 goats, and the question was, well, how are you gonna get me the goats? You don't have the goats with you, and do you do a secured transaction or an unsecured transaction? Is your transaction going to be collateralized or not? And so the transaction, for her benefit, had to be collateralized. So he gave her over things that were incredibly compromising, right? His walking stick, his signet ring, and things like this. And that's what she took as her collateral for ensuring her payment. However, as you see in the Gemara over here, that he was asking her on other things as well. Kishatava Amar La, when he was propositioning to her, he said, Shemanachris, at maybe you're a idol worshiper. Amar La Giyaris Ani. She says, no, I'm a Giyaris. So Rashi explains, doesn't mean that she's a Giyaris to being a Jew. Right? Obviously, that would give it away who she was, but it means that she was no longer an idol worshiper. Shema Isha, maybe a married woman. Amle Pranuyani. She says, I am not married. Whether or not there is a specific issue in terms of when somebody is being mizana with a guy, if the guy is a married woman or not, is a very interesting topic. I've talked about it before, and we're not going to be able to do it now. The Shema Kibo Bach Avich Kedushin, he says, maybe you're engaged. Right? She says, I'm Yisema, meaning my father is gone. Even if my brother was marrying me off, I wouldn't be, it would only be a Rabbanan kind of a level of Kedushin. It wouldn't be on the Raisa level. So I'm not betrothed. Shema Tameat, maybe you're an Ida, I'm really Tairani. Fine. So the Gemara. Now we have a pasuk by Avram Avinu by Ita Esha Be'Ershava. Avram plants an Esha. He plants a tree in Be'ersheva. Amar Shlakish Balamin She'asa Pardes V'nata by Kol Minim Megadim. Avram Avinu planted what's it called? What's a pardes? How do you say it in English? Not a vineyard, no, an orchard. An orchard. That's the one. So he planted some sort of an orchard, and he had in Devnata by Kominim all sorts of delicious types of things in there. One says it's like a little pardes, like a little orchard. One says it's not a pardes, it's a pundik, it's an inn. So the more bishlan pardes makes sense. Quantum holds that it's a pardes. That's what it means that he planted. El mandar pundik, but according to Mandar says it's an inn. My vaita, what does it mean he planted anything? The sevaita ole apandai. The pasuk tells us there in Daniel that one of the kings planted his palace. He planted the tent of his palace. So Rashi tells us here that it's a cute nitrican. Right, the word Esha could be understood as achila, shastia, and levaya. Right, and he gave to eat, to drink, and he accompanied them. So this was part of the business of Avraham Avinu of being Makar people of Shem Shamayim. So V'ita Esha V'Ershava is he was opening up an inn, doing Achlasas Archim to bring in the world to Hashem, and that would be then a good connection to the next Gemara. V'Yikra B'Shem Hashem Kel Olam, that he called out in the name of Hashem. Amar Shlakish, Al Tikri Vayikra, don't mean that he called it out as we turn the page to Yudam Beis. Ella V'Yikare, right? That rather he was teaching others that they should call out to the Shem of Hashem, right? That Avram is being Makarev. Remember the psuk in the beginning of Lech Lecha, right? V'Hanefesh Asher Asa B'Charan, Melame, that Avram was Makarev the Anashim and Sarah is Makarev the Nashim. So over here as well, we see that Avram taught everybody to call on the name of Hashem. Everybody was passing through. He taught them to call out the name of Hashem. How do you see that? After people finished eating and drinking, they wanted to get up and thank him. Is he eating really my food? You're eating really Hashem's food. You have to thank Hashem. And in that way, he was able to espouse and to propound the knowledge of the Rebbeinu Shalom around the world. Right, and we go back to Yehuda now for a second. Yehuda saw this woman on the crossroads and thought she was a Zaina. Why? Because she was covering her hair, her face. Is it normative to think that somebody who covers their face is probably the Zaina? Maybe it's the reverse, right? The covering the face is the supposed height of tznius, not the Zaina. So the Gemara says, that she was covering her face in the house of her father. In other words, on the crossroads, she wasn't covering her. How would she be attractive? Why would the guy be interested? But no, in the house of her father, she covered her face. She was such a sanua there that he had no idea who she was. And so therefore now when she's on the crossroads, he has no clue that this is his daughter-in-law. That anybody who is at Sanua in her father-in-law's house, and her in-laws, is going to be zeicha to have kings and prophets come out of them. Minolan, what is the source of this? Mi Tamar. Tamar is the source of showing us this. Why? Because Nevi'im, the Sif Chazain Sher Ben Amoitz, right? The source of this is that we know Yeshayahu, the Navi, he was the son of somebody named Amoitz, and Melachim, we know that David, right? She has David HaMelech as a descendant of Tamar. So the Amar of Levi, David Zemeseres Biyadenu, Me'avesenu, Amoitz v'Amatzia Achim Havi. Right? There was two brothers, Amoitz and Amatzia, right? Yeshaya ben Amoitz, and Amatzia was a king of Yehuda. So if they're brothers, then you see how she was zeichet to have Malachim and to have Nevi'im. Both descend from her. Why? Because we said Tsanua in her father-in-law's house. Then is the Gemara, he would say she was being taken out for the, to the pyre. She's going to be burned at the stake. So the Gemara asks, he say, it shouldn't say that she's being taken out, which is mashma. Also, maybe she was found, but rather mitzvah says that she's being like coercive, being brought out. Why does it use a lashon of more like mitzvah? Right after her collateral was found, right? She's trying to give her collateral to Yehuda and to say, hey, this is me. You should recognize this. But Samuel doesn't want Mashiach to come, right? The Samach Mem, the Yetzer Hara, right? The Malach HaMaves, he's trying to distance the Jewish people from having the ability to have Mashiach. So he's taking the simanim that she has and like sort of distancing them, throwing them away. That's what it means. Like Gabriel was coming along and bringing it back, but this is the connection to the idea of mutzeis, that it was like found because it was trying to be taken away, and she found it and is like giving it back because Gabriel's helping her out. We have a pasuk in Tehillim that talks about the sort of mute yaina, that this is a reference to that. When they took the siman that Tamar had to prove to Yehuda who she was, nasas kiyana ilemes, right? She became like a mute dove. She had nothing to say, right? If she doesn't have the simanim, she's going to be burned. She has no basis for her arguing otherwise. Yeah. Says the Moral Dove Michtam to darshan out the rest of this pasuk over here. What is it referring to? Michtam. What does that mean? Says the Gemara. Sheyatsa menu David. That she had a descendant. This is a reference to that Tamar was going to have a descendant of David. Shahaya mach vitam. That she was that David HaMelech was both tam, like tamim, like I gave a class last night in relation to tam tiem Hashem lekecha. The idea of being a tam, David HaMelech was very wholesome, and mach, he was also very modest. What does it mean? That she was zeichet to this kind of a descendant again because of the fact that she was, sort of tested to the furthest limits. Yeah. So David HaMelech was also like this. He was also a very wholesome and modest person. So I'm sorry, lakol, that he was also like this. Davar Acher, what is it? Another pshat and understanding. What does it mean? Michtam. What does it mean? Shehaisa makasai tama. That his mach is understood as a short version of maka. That his wound was tama, was healed. What does it mean? Shenel kishumal. He was born when he had already a bris. We're going to see that later on. The Gemara is going to tell us about one of the understandings of Moshe Rabbeinu, that he was also born Ner L'Mohel here on Yud Beis Amud Aleph. We'll see that in a couple of days. Davar Acher, Michtam, another understanding of what Michtam means is Keshem Shebekat Nusay, Hiktin Atzmai, Etzel Mishagadol Mimenu, Lilmai Torah, Kach Begad Lusay. Just like he was so modest when he was younger, he was putting himself down to go learn by anybody who's better than him. So too, when he was older, he never changed from this humbleness. Right? Remember the Gemara Brachas Dal that we had, that David HaMelech would learn by Mephibosheth. Why was it Mephibosheth? Because he was embarrassing David HaMelech. He was such a great learner that David was humiliated. Nevertheless, he would always say, Mephibosheth, Rebbe, Yafa Dante, Yafa this, he always kept the humbleness and the modesty even after he had become the big king. She sends to her father-in-law saying that whoever I'm essentially impregnated by whoever this is, but she doesn't say who it was. So says the Gemara, right? So let her say, again, this is not Rav Shimon The Chassid is Reb Shimon Chasida, the Amira. The Amr le'Emar Rabbi Yechon Shem Shimon Yechai. Noach le'la Adam sheyapo atzma l'tich kivshan ha'esh al yalvim pnei chaver barabim. It's greater to die than it is to humiliate somebody else. And we see that from here from Tamar, who was willing to die and not to humiliate Yehuda. And that's why she just says whose it is. Minala Tamar, how do we see that? We see that from Tamar. The pasuk says by Tamar, Haker no. She just said recognize it. Amar Chamar Barchanina, Behaker Bisar La'aviv, Behaker Bisru. Right? She uses Yehuda used the lashon of Haker to his father. Right? He said when they sort of sold Yosef. They kill two goats and they take the blood and they put the ktanis in the dam, and then they take the ktanis and they go to Yaakov and they say, "Hakanah l'miyakisenis," right? Who is it? And it's Zayvei Tarif Yosef. He learned that out from the Haker, so he gets punished with the Haker. The Haker Bisru, that's how he got punished with Haker as well. The Haker Biser, what does it mean? He said Hakanah Kasenis bin Chayim Loi. The Haker Bisru. It's literally Mida Keneged Mida, and this fits nicely with the Sotah idea of it being right? The way the person acts, that's how he gets acted upon. What is not mentioned in this Gemara, what the Gemara is leaving out, is there is actually another aspect to this Haker. Yehuda says Haker, and then he gets told Haker by Tamar. That is very clear, but that's all in Paris Vayesha. But it actually starts out earlier, right? Who is the one who caused the first lack of recognition? That is actually Yaakov Avinu. The pasuk says, "V'loihi kiro." Yitzchak did not recognize him. And what happens to Paras Vayetze on that night? He thinks it's Rachel in the morning. And if you look there in the Medrash Rabbah in Perek Ayin, Siman Yotes, the Medrash makes it super clear that Leah said to him, "Every barber has his students. You made your father not recognize you, so I made me not recognize you. You got your just desserts." So you see Haker happening throughout the lives of Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Yehuda. We have to stop it over here. All right. Have a good job.